I try to think of myself when I was peaking or considering peaking on the peaking journey. How would I have wanted? What would have been helpful for me when it came to other more experienced people who had already peaked in terms of how they wanted to be treated? And I remember, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Joss, but when I reached out to you at LGB Alliance USA, I was actually a little bit squishy. And I actually meant that it said that I think in my email, like, I'm not entirely 100% on board, but like, are you open to other perspectives? And you were very, very nice. You're like, yeah, come on, just, come talk to us and we're open. And I joined and I started talking to the team and I started peaking more when I realized how nice and reasonable that side was the whole time. It really blew my mind. So I try to be as charitable as possible to people wherever they are on the peaking journey, because I know how helpful it is to be, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for November 10th, 2025. We are here with Joss and me, Arianne. First, a summary of the news. LGB Alliance Iceland's Eldur Christensen loses his libel and defamation suit. The Sixth Circuit Court rules an Ohio school district cannot require that students use preferred pronouns. Ongoing lawsuits in Massachusetts and Oregon regarding female athletics and free speech show promising signs. The U.S. Supreme Court okays Trump rules mandating sex-based identification on passports. And lesbian singer-songwriter Tish Hyman publicly peaks after an unpleasant encounter with a trans-identified male in a women's locker room in California. We'll start with international news. On Monday, November 3rd, a district court in Reykjavik, Iceland, ruled against Eldur Christensen in his case against Icelandic state broadcaster RUV. We have reported on this case before. Eldur is our colleague from Iceland's LGB Alliance, and he sued Iceland's state broadcaster and its journalists, Bergstein Sigurðsson, for libelous and defamatory comments made during Eldur's campaign for public office. According to a video Eldur put out on X on November 5th, the state broadcaster claimed on November 26th of last year that Eldur had been removed by the police for illicitly photographing children and staff on school grounds, a claim that Eldur has publicly refuted. This accusation initiated a series of events, including an ongoing investigation against Eldur for hate speech. The RUV published a small correction on their website in fine print, but they didn't issue any apology or correction on TV. Apparently, that online correction was enough to satisfy the judge in this case, who rejected Eldur's libel and defamation case and required him to pay the court fees. Eldur claims in the video that he knew in advance that the judge was likely biased and was prepared that the outcome would likely not be in his favor. Eldur, however, maintains that the website correction was not enough to inform the general public about their inaccurate comments made on primetime TV and plans to appeal the verdict. We send our best wishes to Eldur, and we will continue to keep you all updated on his appeal. On the other hand, here in the US, we have some good judicial news to report. In a win for free speech, the Sixth Circuit, in a 10-7 decision, issued a temporary injunction against the school district of Olentangy, Ohio, for mandating that students use preferred pronouns instead of sex-based pronouns. The plaintiff was the group Parents Defending Education, which represents parents and students who argued their free speech rights were violated by being forced to use preferred pronouns that didn't match the person's biological sex. The school district, in turn, argued that its preferred pronoun mandate is justified under anti-harassment ordinances. The court agreed with the plaintiff, stating, quote, The Supreme Court's cases provide a clear answer. A school district may not restrict personal speech on matters of public concern unless the speech would materially and substantially disrupt school activities or infringe on the legal rights of others in the school community. Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District in 1969 was the case cited. In this case's current posture, the school district has fallen far short of meeting this demanding standard. It introduced no evidence that under the use of biological pronouns would disrupt school functions or qualify as harassment under Ohio law. Our society continues to debate whether biological pronouns are appropriate or offensive, just as it continues to debate many other issues surrounding transgender rights. The school district may not skew this debate by forcing one side to change the way it conveys its message or by compelling it to express a different view, unquote. The court did go on to add that the school district may continue to protect transgender students from harassment in the same manner they protect other students. It's great to see pro-biological reality viewpoints protected as free speech. And now moving on to a few other court cases we are keeping an eye on regarding gender identity and free speech, this time regarding sports. On Wednesday, November 5th, the First Circuit Court heard arguments in the Felder versus Kelly case. The plaintiff in this case are parents, represented by the Institute for Free Speech, who tried wearing XX armbands to a girls' soccer game at school as part of a silent protest against a trans-identifying boy playing on the opposing team. Officials stopped the game and demanded the parents remove their armbands or leave. The parents are suing, arguing their free speech rights are violated. Interestingly, according to observations made by Glenna Goldus on X, the Democratic judges seemed sympathetic to the parents. In the hearing, Clinton appointee Justice Lynch asked the Institute for Free Speech if it's possible to support gay rights but oppose trans athletes. The lawyer for the Institute said, absolutely, and Lynch referred to the statement later. In another exchange, the lawyer for the school struggled to give a compelling answer for why the school allowed progress flags but not XX armbands. It's a good question and one that warrants more than hand-waving as an answer. If the school opposes disruption of games, why not ban political symbols entirely? Why allow certain symbols but not others? It seems like an obvious case of bias. In a similar vein, there is another case going on in Oregon that we've reported on before, where two female athletes claim their free speech rights were violated when they were punished for stepping down from a podium in protest of a male athlete identifying onto a girls' team. It was reported on November 7th that U.S. District Court Judge Yuli Yim Yu denied a motion from the defendants, that is, the Oregon Student Athletics Association, or the OSAA, to strike a part of the lawsuit that discussed what speech the OSA did allow. This allowed speech includes pro-LGBTQ and pro-Black Lives Matter messaging. Judge Yu, who is an Obama appointee, apparently thought that arguments about selective and biased speech codes could be relevant to the issue at hand, and hence she rightfully denied the motion to strike that piece of evidence. We'll see how courts in both cases ultimately rule, but it would be nice for a Democratic court to finally rule in favor of free speech for proponents of sex-based rights. And now moving on to a big defeat for gender identity at the national level. Last Thursday, November 6th, the Supreme Court gave the Trump administration the go-ahead to enforce a new rule requiring that passports list natal sex rather than gender identity. The ruling was a left-right 6-3 split. Trump's new rule changes pre-existing policy dating from 1992, which allows for people to use gender identity on their passports instead of sex, provided that they offer doctor's certification that they have undergone medical gender transition. This policy was expanded in 2021 under the Biden administration to remove the medical documentation requirement and also allow the X marker for non-binary identities. The court wrote in an unsigned interim opinion that, quote, displaying a passport holder's sex at birth no more offends equal protection principles than displaying their country of birth. In both cases, the government is merely attesting to a historical fact without subjecting anyone to differential treatment, unquote. The Supreme Court overruled two lower court decisions that ruled the Trump rule was discriminatory and harmful to trans-identifying people. Of course, we have to remember that the Supreme Court only said this new passport policy is legal. They didn't mandate sex-based markers on passports, they only allowed for them. So a future administration could always rescind Trump's policy. And that's why it's important to establish a more clear and consistent national precedent for gender policy to prevent these chaotic fluctuations that leave documentation holders hanging. And on that note, I'll hand it over to Jos, who has some exciting news on the celebrity front.
Thanks, Arianne. I'm excited to talk about what has been going on with the singer-songwriter Tish Hyman, which has blown up recently on social media. The TLDR of the situation is that Tish has had multiple instances of males walking in on her and other women and girls in the locker room of a Gold's Gym in Hollywood, California. The first time it happened, she was shocked. She covered herself and said, "Excuse me, sir." He replied, quote, "You can't tell me nothing, bitch. I'm a woman," end quote, followed by, "I'm not leaving the women's room. I can be in here." Tish filed a complaint with the gym and kept trucking. The next time it happened, it was the very next day, but this time it was an entirely different man LARPing as a woman. This time, Tish was face to face with a man now identified by Redux magazine as Grant Freeman. Again, shocked, Tish exclaimed that he couldn't be in the women's room, to which Grant replied, "Bitch, you need to get with it. I'm a woman." She stood her ground that he wasn't welcome, and he yelled, "I'm a trans woman. I'm not going anywhere." But he did go somewhere because Tish said, "Fine, stay. I'm going to call the police." So he left, and the police never showed up. But because Grant left the scene, they said there was nothing that they could do. Feeling defeated and just wanting to use the gym facilities safely, she went to another location 2 days later. The new facility had recently been upgraded, and so Tish was commiserating with another female patron in a locker room about how nice the facilities were at that particular location, and that Tish was only there because she kept running into men in the women's locker room at this other location. At exactly that moment, Grant walked around the corner and said, "Are you talking about me?" To which Tish said she raised hell, and raise hell she did. This encounter is part of what unfolded in the now viral video of Tish confronting the man and the staff about allowing men in the women's locker room.
Now he knows how to be a man, right? Now he knows how to be a man. Stay out of the women's locker room. We don't want it. He needs to have his gym membership revoked for that shit. And the woman told you. He assaulted me. The girl told already. We already filed reports. No.
That's fine. I want the video.
You can't get rid of me for this. I'm a woman and I have every right to not want a man in the restroom when I'm naked. There are girls naked in there. Look at them walking in there like it's okay. It's not okay.
Ultimately, it was Tish who was kicked out of the gym, and her membership was revoked by Gold's. This whole thing set off a chain of events where Tish, who was openly lesbian, peaked in front of the world. And in the process of peaking, Tish, like many of us, sought a middle ground. When I was first peaking, I also thought maybe there was a middle ground. Maybe third spaces were the way to go. I offered this up on social media, as many others had before and after me. And we all have been shut down because a safe third space isn't the goal. A safe place to pee isn't really what trans activists are after. They seek validation, and that doesn't come from a safe space to pee, but from invading the safe spaces of women and girls. So Tish offered up her middle ground solution of safe third spaces and using the term transsexual instead of transgender. And what happened next is surprising and also regrettably unsurprising. Gender-critical Twitter kind of flipped on her. Without giving this woman a minute to catch her breath, after being thrown into this very sordid and unnecessarily complicated reality of being pro-woman and girls in 2020 and beyond, GC Twitter turned. This, for me, is a point of frustration. We must look at the bigger picture. We should all be extremely grateful that Tish is willing to put herself and her career in the line of fire for women and girls. What that looks like will undoubtedly change over time as she learns and grows in her opinions on this issue. But to castigate her for pushing for third spaces is just plain stupid. Someone said that Tish was trying to dox Grant's ex-wife when she asked about the ex and how she was doing. According to Redux, Grant's ex-wife was beaten so badly by him that she needed corrective surgery for her face. And Tish was merely asking about where she was, and this was associated with an attempt to dox the wife. Like, what? That's crazy. It's crazy purity politics, and we don't have time for that nonsense. At this point, Tish is firmly on the side of men are men and women are women, no men in women's spaces, no trans talk until 18. It's easy, it's clear. But to take issue with her process is unnerving to me. She went through, in the span of a couple of weeks, what many of us have had years to process and develop opinions around. We should be thankful to Tish for taking bold, decisive action to protect women and girls. Further, we need to stop with the purity politics. We take one step forward and two steps back when we participate in ego theatrics. Just be happy that another woman, another lesbian, has joined the fold and offer support to those who are making waves. Tish has a petition called Protect Women's Only Spaces Nationwide, Privacy and Safety Legislation in 50 states. We encourage you to sign it and add your voice along with the others helping Tish in this fight for sex-based rights. There are a little over 19,000 people signed right now at the time of this recording, and the petition will be linked in our show notes. Arianne, I'm curious what you think about all of this.
Wow. So thank you, Joss. That was all very well said. And I can say, as someone in California, women here are definitely excited about the Tish Hyman public peaking story. And it was something I brought up, I think it was last news segment or two, how deep the roots of gender ideology, infiltration in law are in California. It was all the way back in 2005 under Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger that legislation was signed that allowed men to identify their way into women's locker rooms. And that surprised a lot of people, myself included. Governor Schwarzenegger himself probably didn't really even know what he was signing when he did that. And so a lot of people on social media are trying to get his attention, tagging him, saying, hey, speak out against this. So Tish Hyman, that's the backdrop for how deep-rooted this locker room problem is in California. And I'm so happy that we finally have someone like Tish Hyman who's willing to speak.
Yeah, I would have to agree. The I'm personally grateful, and but it goes to show the whole thing being signed by Schwarzenegger in 2005 that we have to allow for some time for people to get their heads around what it is exactly that we're facing off with here, because we've been sort of conditioned as a society to be kind, to be nice, and to make space for people in watching what is now hours of Tish talk about this process on Instagram. You can see her whole many lives that she's done and basically interviews that she's given to her audience about this process, that it takes time to get your head around. Like, she went from this being confronted with this to then having to react to it and it happening so quickly, so many different these experiences happening in succession, and realizing first and foremost she wanted to protect young girls. That's her primary focus. She just thought about and continues to think about and continues to talk about why this is so important to her. It's about kids. And seeing subsequently later, seeing a mom let a young girl go into the bathroom by herself and just thinking, but there could be a man in there. She's not really safe. No one's really safe to go, especially young girls, not really safe to go into the bathroom anymore. This used to be the safe space. In fact, when I was young, my mom would send my brothers into the bathroom with me, my little brothers, because that was the safe space for even them as little boys way back in the day. So this has always been like this bastion of safety that is just no more. And to come to terms with that when we've been conditioned, especially as the LGBTQ, winky fingers community, that these are homosexuals. They're just homosexual transsexuals that have a problem with their gender and dysphoria and yada yada. So be kind and make a space for them. And it's not that big a deal. And it's just a couple of them, but that is not what's happening anymore. And it's not what's been happening anymore. And I'm so profoundly grateful that Tish is speaking out.
Yeah, and I'd like to also say that conditioning extends to Californians because we're kind of conditioned to being nice and to being chill and, not to be overly judgmental. And this is something that has been brought to my attention sometimes when I meet people from other parts of the country or other countries that like, I was not really raised to be confrontational. So, this is something that I think in California we all have to work on. How do we deal with that? And I also would like to say that I really like the way you put it, Joss, about how we should just celebrate when someone comes out publicly as being on our side, especially someone who has a career that she could be putting on the line. It's a very brave thing to do. And we shouldn't be playing games about, who deserves the most credit. I know I have a huge amount of respect for people who have been involved in this fight for years, for decades, who are always on the right side of this issue. If you're listening, I really commend you for being correct early and showing the warning signs early. However, I think that in order to win these sorts of battles, we can't just make it an ego fest. We have to know what's right for the team and what's right for the cause. And that's where I'm at. And I think that's how a lot of other people feel looking into this. We're just grateful.
Yeah, and this is exactly why we didn't comment right away when all of this stuff started to blow up, because this happened initially, I want to say it was just before Halloween, where the post started coming out, and we took the time to just see how things unfolded, because so much can develop in such a short amount of time, and to not put any pressure also on that process for Tish to experience what she's experiencing and she's talked with a number of different people in the affected communities, and I think that's how we've seen her opinion on it change here and there. But people need time to make sense of everything, and especially I think for same-sex oriented people who have been in the community for a long time. Tish is 42, so we very much are part of that kumbaya, our trans siblings thing. This is the conditioning from HRC and GLAAD and all of these works that have been very effective. So I think we have to give grace to anybody for some missteps here and there. They're going to happen, but who is ultimately the arbiter of the right way to be gender critical? That's really ultimately the bottom line for me is we just need to be working together on those points that we see in common with each other versus picking each other apart. Because I can tell you for sure, there are a lot of trans identifying males in Tish's comments picking her apart. Like, you notice the through line in each of those men when they talk to her, they use the term bitch. So there's a DL Whisperer on Instagram who's also pointing out how harmful and misogynistic a lot of these trans activists are when they're picking apart women, and they really just hold nothing back. And by the same token, want women to be very kind and make space for them. It's asinine. But I'm really grateful to new people we're seeing now in the fold of DL Whisperer and Tish to call this out, to say what's happening, and speak truth to insanity, to delusion.
It is, Joss, a bit of a paradox here. The trans-identified male who, on one hand, wants to be taken seriously as a woman, who also wants women to be kind, and so they demand to be taken seriously as a woman by being extremely mean. Something isn't quite fitting here. Are women supposed to be kind? If they are, maybe you should try to be kind too. Hmm.
How about that? That's such a good point. That is such a good point. That's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Or I guess in this case, it's the trans gander is good for the gander. I don't know. Which is the goose and which is the gander. At any rate, yeah, it's full of oxymorons and things that just don't make any sense. This whole it's so built on crazy that it just when I found out that Grant uses his ex-wife's name, Alexis, like that's just you go it's just there's so many compounding steps of crazy in this that it's hard to make sense of it. So it's going to take anybody a little bit of time to get their feet kind of grounded and get their head set on what is actually happening. But the bottom line is that men are just going into women's spaces and they have the right by law to do that. I think the thing that is very different here with Tish compared to maybe most native Californians is that she's from the Bronx. So she's not having any of this, like just not having it.
That is an excellent point, and I didn't know that about Tish previously, but that would explain that sort of tough New Yorker directness that I've come to appreciate now, having had to live through this madness in California. That's a good point. One thing I think about a lot is I try to think of myself when I was peaking or considering peaking on the peaking journey. How would I have wanted? What would have been helpful for me? When it came to other more experienced people who had already peaked in terms of how they wanted to be treated. And I remember, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Joss, but when I reached out to you at LGBT Alliance USA, I was actually a little bit squishy. And I actually meant that said that I think in my email, like, I'm not entirely 100% on board, but like, are you open to other perspectives? And you were very, very nice. You're like, yeah, come on, just, come talk to us and we're open. And I joined and I started talking to the team and I started peaking more when I realized how nice and reasonable that side was the whole time. It really blew my mind. So I try to be as charitable as possible to people wherever they are on the peaking journey, because I know how helpful it is to be, to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you for that story. I didn't remember this, and I think that that's fantastic. So thank you for sharing that and reminding me. But yeah, we have to meet people where they are because we've all been somewhere on this. It's a roller coaster, and we've all been somewhere on that roller coaster together, just not at the same time. So we need to give, just like we're trying to make a safe space for LGBT youth to land as they're figuring themselves out, we need to make a safe space for gender critical LGBT people and not LGBT people to land while they're figuring themselves out. It doesn't have to be so cut and dry. We're working for the same thing together. So let's work together.
Yeah, thank you, Joss. That is all very well said. And on that note, thank you everyone for joining us and listening. And I hope to see you again next time.